Buenas tardes y bienvenidos sean todos. Nos complace y nos llena de gusto contar con su distinguida presencia a este magno evento. Hoy, el Instituto Tecnológico de Chihuahua se viste de gala para recibir al profesor George Smoot, el Premio Nobel de Física en el año 2006. La iniciativa Honeywell para la Ciencia y la Ingeniería es un programa educativo que abarca universidades alrededor de varios lugares del mundo. Uno de sus objetivos es mostrar cómo la ciencia y la ingeniería pueden trabajar de la mano con los negocios para inspirar a estudiantes a involucrarse en profesiones de ciencia e ingeniería. Gracias a esta iniciativa, los estudiantes podemos asistir a conferencias de renombradas y conocidas personalidades, como es este caso, en ramas de la ciencia que comparten su testimonio con nosotros. Conocer a líderes en la tecnología que comparten información acerca de los innovadores proyectos de Honeywell. Asesoramiento profesional de reclutadores de Honeywell que ayudan a los estudiantes a descubrir carreras de ingeniería, tales como lo es la ingeniería aeroespacial, automatización y control, controles ambientales y en combustión, entre otras. Agradecemos la presencia del personal, jefes de departamento, docentes, personal administrativo, estudiantes de nuestro Instituto Tecnológico de Chihuahua, así como a nuestros familiares y amigos. A continuación, le cedo la palabra al ingeniero Rafael González, líder del Centro de Diseño de Chihuahua, Honeywell Technology Solutions, para que dé seguimiento en la presentación del profesor George Smoot.
Muchas gracias, muy buenas tardes a todos. Ese entusiasmo yo lo oí muy apagado. Sí, que se oiga ese entusiasmo. Mejor. Bueno, me da mucho gusto ver a tantos jóvenes reunidos en esta conferencia, el Camino al descubrimiento, organizada por la iniciativa de Honeywell para la ciencia y la ingeniería. A través de este programa, Honeywell brinda a estudiantes alrededor del mundo una oportunidad como la del día de hoy, de conocer a un premio Nobel, para escuchar su experiencia y una perspectiva diferente sobre la ciencia. Para quienes trabajamos en Honeywell, Chihuahua, es un honor que esta iniciativa tenga lugar en el Instituto Tecnológico de Chihuahua. Varios somos egresados y hay incluso quienes están estudiando su posgrado o son profesores de esta institución. Recibimos estudiantes para hacer sus prácticas de verano o su tesis con nosotros. Somos parte del Consejo de Vinculación Empresarial y cada semestre participamos en las actividades de la semana académica. Creemos que para acelerar el desarrollo de países como el nuestro, se necesita que los jóvenes no dejen de incursionar en las áreas de ciencia, tecnología, ingeniería y matemáticas. El mundo cada vez es más complejo y se está volviendo aún más conectado, por lo que la necesidad de más ingenieros es aún mayor que antes. En el Centro de Diseño de Honeywell Technology Solutions, que encabezo, requerimos ingenieros talentosos, expertos en electrónica, mecánica, software, para hacer investigación y desarrollo de tecnología, para confort ambiental, seguridad, detección de incendio y soluciones inteligentes de energía. Y ahora quisiera darles una breve introducción sobre nuestro orador. El profesor George Smoot es profesor de física de la Universidad de California, científico experimentado del laboratorio de Lawrence Berkeley en los Estados Unidos y catedrático en la Universidad de Diderot en París, Francia. El profesor Smoot fue premiado con el Premio Nobel de Física 2006 por sus hallazgos sobre la radiación del fondo cósmico causada por el Big Bang. Gracias a sus observaciones con el satélite COBE, explorador del fondo cósmico de la NASA, determinó la intensidad de radiación durante etapas tempranas del Big Bang, hallando variaciones tan pequeñas que pueden considerarse las semillas que hicieron crecer las galaxias que actualmente forman el universo. Pero voy a dejar al profesor les hable más al respecto. Por favor, démosle la bienvenida al profesor Smoot.
Okay, so I have to try and make this talk on time. I overran last time. This is supposed to be about my journey or how I became a Nobel laureate, but I thought I would give you another example. I find that I learn better from examples, and I think other people learn better from examples. But one of the things that was critical in my growth was to have mentors explain to me, don't just do what you did before and do it better. Look around, see what new opportunities exist, what inventions, technologies, discoveries make a new area open or can be transferred into a different area and make things work in that other area. And so I'm going to give you an example of something that I thought of that I was keeping my enthusiasm and excitement up because I presented at a conference, and then it's a proposal to a hospital for them to start doing this research. And it's about a possible new future in orthopedics. That's pretty strange for somebody that studies the universe. But what I'm really talking about is the general class of things, of which this is one of, which is applying engineering to health, in this particular case, medicine, and seeing what it implies for the future. And so I have a brief outline here. 2,000 years of orthopedics that we know about, and perhaps more. And that's true of medicine. And over that 2,000 years, medicine has not changed very dramatically. Only recently are we starting to see significant impacts of technology on medicine. So I'm going to give the example of 3D scanning and printing and how it can impact the field of orthopedics, but medicine and health in general, from surgical models for teaching and from practicing surgeries, for tools and printing things you actually put in people's bodies. Eventually you'll print organs like kidneys, and for rehabilitation, right? And then later on, to show that as science gets better, we're going to go to gene therapies, and we're only going to use these kind of inventions for trauma or for particular cases that got out of hand. This is German on there for some reason. Okay, so this is about 2,000 years. So this is a picture of a temple in the Ptolemaic time from Egypt. So it's roughly from 100 BC, or 2,000 years ago. And if you look carefully in the center section, you will see surgical tools. You'll see scalpels, forceps, and other devices that were used by surgery. In those days, they probably made them out of copper and brass, most likely copper. And the only change of modern tools has been to make better grades of stainless steel. So for 2,000 years, there hasn't been major changes in surgery until now. You're beginning to see changes starting to happen as we learn to do things better and as engineering tools get applied to surgery. But that's the thing that I'm saying. So you can see the various devices in the center panels that are devices that a typical surgeon would recognize today, right? Even though they're 2,000 years old. And so you're seeing one of the reasons I'm focusing on medicine. It is a field which is very important to humans, but it's also a field that's very ripe for change and a place where you can take new devices, new technologies, and new procedures and make a radical change and a radical improvement in the field. And that's one of the ways you have a journey to being, not necessarily a Nobel laureate, although you could get to be a Nobel laureate for that, but make big changes and so forth. So let me go forward with this. Here's an example of a 3D printed model for surgery. You have a high-speed scanner. So one of the things that we developed in the last 100 years, but is being used more and more, is CT scanners and MRI machines that allow us to look inside the human body without cutting it open. So more than 100 years ago, People didn't understand the physics. They didn't know if there was something wrong with you, they cut you open and explored. It was called exploratory surgery. You look to see what's going on inside and you fix it, right? That's very crude compared to what we think the future will be, where we're going to look inside of you, figure out what's wrong, send little tiny robotic things in to fix it, and the damage to you is much less. So here you scan and make a very good 3D image of the patient, in this case the skull, because it's going to be brain surgery. You make then a printed 3D model. In this case you can do this in plastic, a standard 3D printer. There's a 3D printed model at the end, and you make it with sections that you can take off, just like you're going to cut the hole in the head. It's like medicine is still crude. You cut a hole in the head, and you go in and you do the surgery. And here are the surgeons practicing how the surgery is going to be. You do the same thing for teaching medical students now. You scan a person, you print out, an anatomical model, and you train the students on that model, and you teach them that way. Later they get their own cadavers and so forth. So this is the first part, training. There's the education part, and there's the practice part. You can imagine if you're doing heart surgery, you no longer saw the person open, pry open their ribs, do the surgery, put them back together, staple them up. You go in through this part or underneath that part, and you probe in through the ribs, and you do the surgery. The impact on the body is much less, and you just do the repair in a local way. That has a much better chance of survival. Okay? So the other thing you can do is what you do during surgery. The first part is you can make special tools for surgery. So if a patient has a certain problem, this is a patient, you can see in the bottom left, was involved in an accident, and his left forearm, was crushed, and it's all swollen up from the injury, and the bones have to be repaired. And so special tools are made, jigs are made to hold the patient in place, and then the surgery is done in a more precise way, and you can see what's going on. And you do that simply by figuring out what parts you need. This, unfortunately, is in French, I'm sorry. You do the commands via the internet, the 3D printer prints it, it gets delivered, you put it together, and that's how it works. So in the future, most hospitals will have a 3D printer. They just print their own, whatever, it's going like that. But the other thing you do is you can 3D print metals now. And in fact, I believe Honeywell does this. It 3D prints titanium, and I think in Chihuahua even. And it's possible now, and I was very impressed by this. I was very impressed when I saw my first plastic 3D printer a decade or so ago. But I thought printing metals was going to take a while because it's much higher temperature. It's much more complicated to do. But it's routine now to print titanium. Titanium is used as a replacement for a lot of joints. So 3 members of my family have had hips replaced where the ball joint was replaced by titanium ball with a prod that goes down inside, and then so forth. But here is the thing. You can go for a company and order a standard set of knee joints, and they come in multiple sizes, and so you tell them which size you want, and you get one, and then you do the surgery, and what you see is there's some places where the bone has been cut open and exposed, and it doesn't quite match. But if you do the surgery in the hospital, you do the surgery, you see where the joint is, you can measure it precisely enough, you just 3D print the titanium and you put it in. The very first example I saw of this was a 3D printing of titanium was for surgery, was for a replacement of a jawbone. A person had been in an automobile accident and lost their left jaw, and it was replaced completely with a 3D printed titanium part, right? So I thought this was really cool, but I think it's not so cool because I've learned about more things in the thing. But what you can see is you get a much better fit, a much better performance in terms of how things go. And the life expectancy for these joints now is very high. Whereas in the early days of replacing hips, you expect you get 10 to 15 years and you have to go in and take and replace the parts and so on. Now you can do it more lightweight. But this is what you do when there's trauma and you have to replace it. What are you going to be doing in the future? And so here's more of the example of the printed versus the unprinted in terms of how well you can do, whether you buy it pre-made and just come the one closest to fit, or you buy it you make it just exactly for the kind of person you want. Uh-oh. Okay, so here's the 3D printing with titanium. I won't go through it. It's just a very high temperature, very complicated kind of stuff. The other thing that you can do is you can print things for rehab. So normally if you broke your arm, they wrap it with a cloth and you put plaster of Paris in it. It's very heavy, it's very uncomfortable. You want to itch, you can't do it. You can 3D print rigid frameworks that fit right in the arm, and it's got air circulating, it's all straightforward. So this is an example of that. Okay. So here's an example. This is a doctor in Beijing who has made replacement vertebrae. So it's very common for people who are heavy laborers. They end up with back problems, and occasionally they get in accidents and crush a whole piece of a vertebrae. So he's made a replacement part, which is 3D printed for the particular person. And this is sort of a more advanced version of the kind of things that are available. Here is a vertebrae that's that way. Here's the old-fashioned kind of replacement of a vertebrae. Here's his new model, this kind of stuff. But all of these are 3D printed to replace a missing place in your spine, right? So I told you this, I'll talk about orthopedics. This is going to have implications in other parts of medicine, but I was focusing on this particular area. Okay, so if you have a problem where where a bunch of your spine was crushed and so forth, you make a longer section to replace more spine, you need a brace, and you can put them internally, and then you have to do new surgery and take it out. Or you can think about 3D printing an external brace to hold the person until there can be some regrowth and rebuilding of the ligaments and so forth. And so that's an example of larger scale and also of recovery kind of activity. So that whole thing that she's wearing is 3D printed, and you see she can take it on and off by the straps and so forth. Okay, here's the jawbone, 3D printed out of titanium, but you can print them out of other things now. And so you can do tissue engineering to regenerate, restore various things, and particularly cartilage and bone defects that you want to try and do that. And I think that one of the things that's interesting is that there are new materials that you can make artificial bones out of now. The titanium was the go-to thing in the past, but now you can do other things. And one of the first things that you end up doing is you can replace that material that you print with material that the body itself generates and replaces. That is, you're putting the stuff into place, and then you're encouraging the body to repair itself and actually use some of the material you put in place to rebuild the bones and the structure. So here's a 3D synthetic bone substitute. So if you don't know, bones are honeycomb, they're not solid. This is a ceramic. So ceramic printers are now possible. It's a little trickier to print ceramics than it was to print plastic, and it's even titanium, but we now have the technology to print ceramics. And you can see this particular ceramic one, and there's little black spots in it. Those are organic chemicals to encourage the growth of blood vessels and new bone cells in that area to replace it. And on animal models, the animals do regrow those cells and their bone cells and their blood cells in this area. But you can also do this by taking coral and grinding up coral and printing with coral, which is very close to bone material. You can just take coral and do that. So we all have an interest in keeping the coral reefs in good shape because we might need them for spare bone parts, at least for a while. Okay. So there's another, synthetic kinds of bone materials that you can do, but you can take advantage of the fact that if you use ceramics or silicone, you're going to make them porous, and you're going to make real bone grow in terms of it. But one of the things that's kind of interesting, this is one where it can actually have some senses. I won't spend some time on it, but you want to actually measure what's going on without sending stuff in. So there are things that you can do. Here's an example of a jaw Well, there was an example of a jaw that's reprinted in synthetic bone material rather than titanium, and where you're hoping eventually you'll have the technology to encourage your own bone cells to grow back in there and replace it, so that you'll eventually have a replaced jaw altogether.
Researchers at Northwestern University
So this is
have
another
created a
invention.
new material they call hyperelastic bone. It can be 3D printed and used by surgeons to treat injuries almost as soon as the printer finishes. Once inserted, this material acts as a structural element and a scaffold for bone regeneration. In animal models, it encourages new bone cells
see
to
the
move
bones
in and
growing
rebuild
back.
the injured area. This means it should help human patients regrow damaged or missing bone. It's also cost-effective and easy for surgeons to customize and deploy. Hyperelastic bone consists of hydroxyapatite, the mineral in bone, suspended in an elastic organic polymer. It's flexible, which makes it easy to put in place. But it's also sturdy and should hold up until the real thing grows in. Hyperelastic bone can be printed at room temperature and handled immediately. It's flexible enough that surgeons can cut it down to fit the patient during the operation. This material's effectiveness and ease of use set it head, shoulders, knees, and toes above the rest of the field.
They're another advertising, right? So the fact is, 3D printing is making it possible for you to think about repairing bones in a very different way. That if people have severe damage, either from an accident or from having had experience in their lifetime where they ended up with bone degenerative diseases, or they've destroyed the cartilage, you can regrow that and so forth. And so what the next level is gene therapy. And that's where you're going to take the genes out of the person, modify them, adjust them, or put some machine in that readjusts some device in that readjusts the body's own genes to rebuild and redo that. And that means there's a lot of stuff you're going to do when you start being genetically sampling people and know they're prone to arthritis or other things. You're going to start a treatment for them early so they never develop those degenerative diseases to start with. And so this is this other thing. So here's an arthritic hand example of the gene therapy where you take some cells out, you find out what genes you need to fix, you go in, you fix them, and then you put them back in the body and let the body repair itself. Okay. And so how is that done in principle, right? You're going to have to biologically adjust the person. You got to go in and fix the place where the genes are not doing quite right, get those genes repaired, and then let the genes then express the right proteins and rebuild the cartilage and the bones that existed so that you won't have these kind of problems in the future. And so the way it's done particularly now is people take out cells, they do gene modifications, put the cells back in, or they go and put it in a virus and have the virus infect your body and change your genes, right? So there's more than one mechanism. Here's an example of a virus vector. You take the virus, you insert the genes that you need to have, you insert that into the person, that goes in and attacks your cells, modifies the genes in your cells, and then do that. And it's self-replicating, and it takes care of what's going on. And so you can look at the kind of orthopedic issues there are. There are the diseases that are inherited. There are the diseases that come from chronic diseases, including cancer and tissues that got damaged some other way that need to be repaired. And you can encourage that. And so now, instead of doing the minimal surgery we do with the orthoscopic surgery, going into the knees and trying to do a little repair, you can actually go in and try and get the body to repair itself. So these are the kind of ideas. The future, I think, when you start thinking about orthopedics as a problem that's an engineering problem as well as a medical problem, you start realizing you have a whole new set of possible solutions and a whole new way of doing the things, and that you're going to have a bright, interesting future because you're going to be able to do a huge set of things, a big stage where you're doing 3D printing, that will eventually go back into the background as being something for trauma cases. And then what you'll be doing is gene therapy, treating people before they get serious problems out of order. But people will always be having accidents, or people will always do things that aren't necessarily good for them, you're going to still have to be able to have some of these other emergency repairs. So I think that's where I want to stop here and be able to answer questions.
Okay.
So that was meant to be an example of thinking, all right, here's an interesting problem. What new technologies, what new devices can revolutionize that field and make it better for everyone, right? There's a tremendous potential in medicine for taking new engineering discoveries and understanding and move them into health and medicine to the point that we're treating people before they ever get diseases so that they don't get those diseases, but still be able to repair them if they get a terrible kind of a thing. Okay? You want to ask questions?
Yes.
Say it again.
Muchas gracias, profesor, por sus palabras. Y a invitarlos, los que no han hecho preguntas o ya han hecho preguntas. No sé si tenemos preguntas aquí de la audiencia. ¿Alguien de micrófono?
Prosthesis? You're talking about the 3D printed bones? There's always an issue, but in fact, the reason they use titanium, the reason that they use certain ceramics and so forth, is the body thinks of them as neutral materials, and it doesn't, So many people are walking around. There are probably people in the audience here who have titanium in them, and the only problem they have is getting through airport security. And it's known that does okay. And many of these plastics and semi-organic things, they're fine too. The body doesn't attack them. A huge fraction of the old age diseases that humans have is the body attacking itself. They're autoimmune diseases. That's a whole separate issue kind of thing like that. So it's sometimes the body rejects itself and you end up with arthritis or other kinds of things. But in this case, these materials all seem to behave quite well. And so I went to the particular hospital I went to, is they do a lot of tests on animal models. That is, before they ever put stuff in humans, they do a whole long sequence of stuff where they put it in animals and see how they respond to it. And then you finally try it on people.
Muy bien, muchas gracias, profesor. ¿Hay otra pregunta? ¿Tenemos otra pregunta ya?
Besides the 3D printing, what do you think is the next step for the medical field? And how can we, the new engineers, help?
Okay, so...
Sorry for my English.
It's an easy question because there are a huge number of places where health and medicine can benefit tremendously from engineering. And one of the things, I have a separate talk that I can give, but one of the areas is in wearable devices. And you can, as an engineer, build sensors that connect to your phone or connect to some other computing power you have, either through the net or through your smartphone, and can monitor your health and wellness situation, including how much you exercise, what you're eating, what's going on with your heartbeat, if you're diabetic, your blood sugar level. There's many devices like that engineers can build and make companies that are making a lot of money. It's a very competitive space these days because a lot of people have recognized that it's useful. But the other area, which is extremely important, is artificial intelligence. And so earlier at the beginning of this month, I went to Shanghai to make a presentation to a cardiac hospital there that's interested in machine learning of how to read electrocardiograms, that is, the rhythm of your